Alrighty, there we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm on today with Mike Riddle. He's our special guest today, and RJ, who's always special, also. And so, Mr. Riddle has a background with Answers in Genesis and lots of other things, and so he's going to give us the rundown on that. And then, if you, the audience, has any questions, then we can probably select some of those. And so, yeah, everything's gonna be good. So, all right, Mr. Riddle, tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I've got a degree in mathematics, undergraduate degree in mathematics, advanced degree in education. That's my formal education there. I have worked with computers for many, many years. My first computers was 1967 with binary programming. I've taught many different areas from public school, junior high, high school, college. I've taught graduate school. I ran U.S. Sprint's worldwide technical training, Microsoft's worldwide engineer training, and I've taught at the Institute for Creation Research's graduate school, done a lot of those things. I've got a background in athletics, competed worldwide in track and field and decathlon. Had some fun there, I still do some running, not competitive though, at my age. I just run against the clock and it never agrees with what I think I did. I was a captain in the United States Marine Corps. So I've had a little bit of a varied background. I grew up an evolutionist. Didn't become a Christian until I was 30 years old and started reading on the sciences more and investigating, and then didn't take long and became a believer in the Bible and biblical account of creation. And that was based on what the Bible taught and what the scientific evidence revealed. So that's a quick background on what I've done.
And we have Jackson's picture there.
I muted myself. Okay, that's cool. And you've your creation training organization. Some of us are or should be familiar with that. Vice Rhino has done a few videos on it, and I actually ran into it kind of by accident. And really, that's kind of what got me into doing YouTube in the first place. Was when I first started, I ran across creation training because a guy recommended a series of videos titled Evolutionless. You ever heard of it?
I've not heard of that one, Evolutionless.
Yeah, they had clips from your creation training show in it, and so that was when I first ran into you, and then I met Charlie later, and then he informed me that he had a connection with you, and now you're here. Look at how far we've gone.
About all our stuff there. We have our PowerPoint slides for free. We have 30-minute videos, about 80 of those for free. We try and help out whatever we can. It's our main mission in our ministry, Creation Training Initiative. It's not the big splashes and the big conferences. What we do is we train others how to speak and teach and how to defend their faith, which is kind of a lost art in Christianity, being able to defend your faith, even though it's a biblical command. So we help train people so they can go out there and defend their faith for what they believe. And no matter what religion you are, you should be trained well enough to know how to defend what you believe.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Yeah, RJ and I RJ specifically has been reading a chapter authored by you in the New Answers book 1. I have 2 right here. 1 is out of reach, and I don't feel like going over there to get it.
Yeah, let me go get that. It's on my desk at the end of the room. Let me go grab that.
Okay. Yeah, because you wrote. You can tell them a little bit about that if you want. You wrote about radiocarbon dating.
Yeah, that was the red book, radiocarbon dating and radiometric dating. In the blue book, I think I wrote a chapter on the origin of life. How did life originate?
I think you did. I do believe I read. Yep, there you are. Can natural processes explain the origin of life? Chapter 6. Yeah. Well, RJ and I are reading. We're gonna read all 4 of these because there are 4 in total as far as we're aware. And so we're kind of going through them and looking at the data presented, things like that. And so we've already, or I'm actually reading a chapter by A.J. Monty White and kind of going through that one. And I'd never heard of him before, so I do some research on him. He's a British young Earth creationist guy, if I remember correctly.
Correct.
Oh, there's a debate between Red's rhetoric and Jeranism going on right now. Okay, well, maybe we'll get people after that wraps up.
Yes, a sidebar on biblical creationism on that one.
Tell us a little bit about your piece on the origin of life, because I haven't read that yet. I haven't gotten there.
Well, the origin of life usually advertised as a showstopper for evolutionists, because there's the problem is we take a look at a single cell, and I say we don't even have to look at that. Let's talk about one small biological protein. We don't have to talk about DNA, RNA, any of those other pieces. Just talk about a protein which is made up of amino acids. Give everybody a quick background. We got atoms, basic unit of matter, combined. They will bond together to make things called molecules, and molecules can bond together to make what we call amino acids. Now, something very interesting about amino acids and proteins. Amino acids come in a lot of different shapes. Well, basically two different shapes. There's many types of amino acids, but they come in two shapes, just like we have a left hand and a right hand. Left and right hand are about the same, but not quite. They're really mirror images of each other. Same components, 4 fingers and a thumb, but when I put my hands together like this, they're like mirror images.
Mm-hmm.
Well, amino acids come in the same type of shape. We call them left-handed and right-handed amino acids. There are other chemical names you can give them, but we'll just keep it simple: left and right-handed amino acids.
We're not going to bore all of you with the technicalities of stereoisomers.
The chirality.
You don't need to do any of that. Just left and right-handed. What that means is they're made up of the same components, same atoms, just mirror images. Well, here's a big catch. Every amino acid in every biological protein, and you have trillions of these in your body, is left-handed. There are no right-handed amino acids used in biological proteins anywhere in life. Why is that so?
Yeah, I don't think that's quite true.
Yes, it is.
Well, it's not though. Actually, bacteria use a lot of right-handed.
Yeah. And so that's a side issue. So you better recheck your source data there, Mike.
In the biological proteins made by the ribosomes, only left-handed amino acids. Nowhere around. They're in the cell wall, but they're not in the proteins.
Well, we went and did.
And there are protein assembly things that don't use the standard ribosome too. That's one of the reasons why studying origins of life issues are so fascinating, because there's all these little loose ends dangling around in various organisms that are kind of like the distant fossils of the pre-Luca kind of organism.
There are right-hand amino acids used in the body, but not in the biological proteins, because it would cause them to fold the wrong way. And that's what proteins do, by the way they fold. So they're all left-handed there.
Well, also we have glycine is also right-handed.
But it's not in the biological protein.
Glycine?
No, not the right-handed ones.
It's I'm sorry, go ahead.
All proteins, all biological proteins now have 100% left-handed amino acids, and there's many sites.
If you talk about this as a kind of a buster argument, turn it around. If it should be established that the origin of life is worked out as to how it occurred naturally, is that going to make an atheist out of you?
No, because I don't think they're going to be able to do that. Number
one.
No.
Let's just posit if they did. This was the same argument that Pasteur warned anti-evolutionists about back in the 1860s. Would you abandon your faith if this problem were cracked by science?
Well, first of all, it's a what-if question. Let's get to reality now.
Well, no, it's a legitimate thought question. Would you stick with your faith even if it were established that life originated naturally?
Sure would. Yes.
Well, then why bring it up as an argument? It's not going to affect your faith any.
Let me ask you this.
Why not pay more attention to the evolution data after the origin of life rather than obsessing about the origin question?
Well, first of all, it's a what-if question, so it really doesn't matter. The question's not even a relevant question. Can they do that? They have not done that. Will they do it? We don't know. Mm-hmm. So it's a what-if question.
Well, it doesn't make the reptile-mammal transition go away.
Well, RJ's point is that when we look at, for instance, generally when evolutionists are talking about evolution versus creationism, abiogenesis is one of the last things we turn to. The issue, I mean, I think there are a lot of Christians out there, for instance, who accept evolution, and they're perfectly happy to say, God snapped his fingers, whatever in life. began, because you still have all this data within evolution that won't go away simply because we don't understand fully how life itself worked out, and we may never know. We might never know, how abiogenesis occurred, but that doesn't mean all the data following, like RJ said, the reptile mammal transition or things like that. That doesn't mean any of that goes away just because we can't work out how the first cell came into existence.
Well, there's a whole lot of problems here. Now, you can't get the first cell. Now, I could turn that whole question around you. If you discovered that there is indeed a creator God who created everything, would that change your view?
Yeah, definitely.
Like that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
My faith is pretty well founded in that there is a creator God, because when I read his book, it says it is his word. Now, you talked about the abundance of evidence. First of all, the origin of life is critical to all of Darwinian evolution.
It's
No,
not,
it isn't.
though.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, have you
No,
read
it
Origin of
isn't.
Species?
Absolutely nothing about the reptile-mammal transition, as an example, depends on how life originated billions of years earlier. It's totally irrelevant. God could have plopped down zillions of created objects before then. It still wouldn't meet the evidence for the reptile-mammal transition.
Well,
I mean,
questions.
Let's stick with reality and observable science.
Well, Mr.
No,
Riddle,
no,
have you?
oh, no. I'm talking about observable. You're not arguing that the reptile-mammal transition data isn't there, are you?
I am. Oh, absolutely.
Well,
Oh, really? Talk. Let's. Shall we jump in on probanognaathids first?
I think we should.
Yeah. Tell us what your understanding of the reptile-mammal transition evidence is, and explain why it somehow fits into a creationist model. Take a whack at that.
I would say that everything's created after its kind. We have variability within kind, but no one has come up with a factual.
No.
RJ, hold on. RJ, hold on.
But I want to go back to the one question. If you can't get the first cell, all of Darwinian evolution is based on that first living cell.
It's
so the
not,
rest
though.
No, it isn't.
Mr. Riddle, it's not.
No, it
though.
isn't.
Okay, then tell me how it happened through observational science.
I don't need to know how it happened. If I'm see, this was one of the things that has hobbled anti-evolutionists for 150 years, is they jump to origins or bust, instead of doing what Darwin and Wallace did, which was to start with existing life and working backwards. And that's what evolution does. It doesn't matter how life originated. If there was a miracle making the first bacteria, it wouldn't make any of the evolution occurring in the reptile-mammal transition go away. So that's why I'm curious to know what you know about that part.
Well, let's not dismiss this issue like you're trying to do.
We're not trying to dismiss the issue. We're not trying to dismiss the issue.
It's a critical issue for all of Darwinian evolution, because where did Darwinian evolution get started without the cell?
Mr. Riddle, that's the point we're trying to make, is that it doesn't matter. It's not a dismissal of the issue. We're trying to make a point that Darwin, Wallace, when we're working out the evolution of life on Earth, we don't have to know how life started to work this out. If we're looking at, how birds evolved from dinosaurs, we don't start with, well, how did life originate? Because that's a non-issue. The issue is, I'm sorry?
I'm not going to let you get away with this one.
We're not trying to get away with anything.
You can tell me how the first cell got, or freely admit you believe it by faith.
I don't.
If you can tell us where gods come from, then we can deal with its other area. You have all religionists have a primary assumptions on this. I know you want to go to origins or bust because it's a strong area for you. But are you claiming that synapsids did not evolve into mammals? None of that changes based on how life originated. And of course, you don't even believe that there's billions of years old for any of this stuff either. So you have a map of time that's missing 99% of the data.
Actually, it's not missing anything. Billions of years old.
Explain the probanognaathids.
You explain them to me. What kind?
Have you ever heard of the probanognaathids? Probanognaathids. They're the transitional predicted fossils in the reptile-mammal transition. Have you ever heard of them?
Transitional predictive? Have they?
They were predicted. They were predicted by Robert Broom down to the muscle attachments and skull layout back in 1912. And in the 1930s on, they actually physically found these things. These were necessary transitional forms in the shifting from the reptile to mammal jaw layout. And they lived back in the Mesozoic period and earlier. And it's an absolutely predicted physical form. Now, have you ever heard of these before? And if you haven't, why not?
Well, I haven't heard about them because first of all, they're not a real true transitional form. because if you go back to the record,
Whoa. Are you saying you've never heard of them at all?
I've not heard of them because it really
And
doesn't.
that's because you did you ever read?
Guys,
did you ever read?
guys, we can't talk at the same time here.
Okay.
We gotta talk one at a time.
Because that's what your argument was about the origin of life. That doesn't matter. All that matters is, see, that's what you're arguing about the origin of life is. So I can use your same argument. It doesn't matter. You have to jump.
What does
Mr. Riddle, here's why. Okay, Mr. Riddle, here's the difference. So with the origin of life, the point we're trying to make is, it doesn't really matter how life originated, because the data that we have about the reptile mammal transition does not disappear because we don't know this part over here.
First of all, you use assumptions on that.
I'm sorry?
How do you know it's a real transition? And it wasn't great.
Let's go into it. Have you ever read Dwayne Gish's Evolution of the Fossil Stills Say No?
Yes, I have.
Then you've read on the pragmatic methods. He explicitly discusses them. He mangles the data, but at least he mentions them. So why didn't you explore more? How much do you know about Mesozoic synapsids?
Well, let me put it this way. I know that the Cambrian explosion is a big problem for you in the fossil record.
No, it's not. I actually did 2 videos on that, and I can explain why in detail why it's not.
Why we don't have all the transitions there?
It's not an issue of transitions. Actually, we do have a lot of transitions in the Cambrian. Okay, well, which
scientists call it a problem?
Well, Mr. Riddle, which lineage do you want to go down, deuterostomes or protostomes?
I don't want to go down either one. I still want to get to the origin of life, which is the problem.
Well, I mean, when do you think the Cambrian
was? Let me ask that at least.
Came from. That's what I'd like to know.
When do you think the Cambrian was, Mike?
The problem with Cambrian, I see it over and over in the textbooks and books. It's a major problem. They just say,
when was the Cambrian explosion, Mike?
Go ahead.
When did it happen? What? How many millions? According to our model, how many millions of years ago did it happen?
And according to his.
According to my model, it's not hundreds of millions of years.
No. According to ours, when did it happen?
You tell me when in your model you think it happened, because you're the one making the claim. It's not
don't you know what the standard model is?
We're talking about the bottom layers, Precambrian layers, and the Cambrian.
When did the Cambrian occur?
Does it matter?
It does matter.
Matters if you don't know.
Why does it matter? All I'm saying is we don't find
I'm saying your map of time is all off.
Well, Mr. Riddle, it matters because if you're going to bring up this issue, we have to understand how it fits into the rest of evolutionary history. If we can't,
the bottom layers, we don't find the transitions.
We do. We do have fossils in the Precambrian.
Name them.
Trichophycus. That's one.
No, they just appear. Yeah. Where'd that transition from?
You're doing the Gish Gallop there. Yeah. So you don't.
Because when I read the book, science journals, they talk about no transition.
I'm sorry.
Explain to me why Cathameris and Haikuella and Pikaia aren't transitional chordates.
Well, I'm not going to get into all those. So I'm still waiting for the origin of life, which is a killer to you, and that's why you avoid it.
And you're avoiding everything after that. When do you think the Cambrian fossils were alive?
Cambrian, we're talking about 500, 600 million years ago.
Okay. And according to you, when were they alive?
Then when they were alive, just thousands of years ago.
Okay. How did you determine that?
Based on what the Bible teaches, and based on there's a pretty good scientific evidence to show the Earth isn't that old.
And who did this pretty good science evidence? How did you fact check it?
Well, we're finding carbon-14 in diamonds, dinosaurs.
Ooh, goody. Oh, I'm glad you brought that up, because I mentioned this to you back in 2010 when we bumped into each other in Spokane. I specifically asked you about the Southon paper that you had directly cited, and you explicitly told me that you had never bothered to read it first. You nicked it from Andrew Snelling. In the 8 years since then, have you ever bothered to read the paper?
No, I haven't.
Why not?
Because I've seen in all the other new scientific research that talks about carbon-14 and dinosaur bones. Coal.
Whoa. But let's get on. What was the point? Can you remember the point I made about the Southon paper and its significance?
No, I can't.
Okay, let me reprise it for you. That Saladin had explicitly noted a variety of perfectly natural and inevitable means why tiny trace amounts of C14 were coming up on these readings and giving 80 to 90,000 years dates. And Andrew Snelling suppressed all of that information in his coverage, and you have never mentioned it in any of your coverage.
I read the rate group book from the Institute for Creation Research. They have some pretty
And
good
they
science.
don't discuss it either.
They talk about the carbon-14 found in diamonds and coal, and it's been repeated.
And they do not discuss this particular point. They suppress that information too. I got both volumes of the rate book. I'm perfectly happy to check it with you.
Go ahead. And also, I'm not saying it's in there or not there, but the fact that we're finding it in dinosaur bones too.
According to who?
According to a lot of scientists now.
Such as?
We're finding soft tissue, carbon-14, and
Do you want to talk about why soft tissue
carbon-14
isn't an argument?
According to whom? I know of no studies that have determined
I
that.
haven't heard
Certainly,
any
Mary
studies.
Schweitzer is claiming there's carbon-14 in dinosaurs.
there's a number of studies out. Well, you don't know about them, then why should I know about the studies you've told me about?
Yeah, jump in, Jack. I'm sorry, I talked too much.
I have actually read studies on the soft tissue, and none of the researchers, with the exception of Mark Armitage, even though he doesn't mention in his paper, none of them conclude that the soft tissue present in the dinosaur fossils indicates that the Earth is young. Do you find that?
How could it be old? You know any?
Well, I mean, quite easily. They give explanations as to why, for instance, the iron has preserved the soft tissue for millions of years.
That's a huge extrapolation. They've done it up to
no, it isn't.
So it's a huge extrapolation. So we can.
Have you read the papers on that, Mike?
Yes, I have. And
why? And what have you written up a technical argument explaining to Mary Schweitzer why she's wrong?
Does it matter if I write one up? That's a decoy right there. It doesn't matter.
Well, you could publish it in Answers in Genesis Technical Journal. You could publish it at the Creation Science Research Quarterly. There's technical journals that creationists do. I would welcome you to do so. I know.
That doesn't, see, now you're going a decoy. It doesn't matter whether I publish something or not. The fact is, carbon-14 has been found in dinosaur bones, soft tissue.
And I say, no, it hasn't. And I still ask you for the sources for these things.
Okay.
Please, if you've got, I can give you email or you can contact Jackson. I urge you to put that information in so we can include it. And I'll check to see if I already have it in my bibliography or not, because I keep track of these things.
Okay. I can ignore you on that one. I'm still wanting to go back to your foundation there. I see you're believing in evolution on a faith issue. You can't persuade anything else.
We can demonstrate how evolution is demonstrably true and makes verifiably accurate predictions.
That's a lie. That's
no, I can do it I can do it right now.
No, you can't.
Yeah, I can. What? Okay, so you understand that we have DNA in us, right? That all of us are related to each other. So we're related to each other because of the sequences of nucleotides in our DNA, and actually we can use and we have a certain number of chromosomes, and the great apes have a certain number of chromosomes. We can actually use what we know about our genetics to make predictions, which we did back in was it the 80s? We made the prediction of chromosome 2, RJ.
Oh, that one's been discounted. You're
it
way
actually
off.
hasn't, and I did a whole video on that one.
Oh, if you want to jump off
on that, why it's.
You still talk about junk DNA probably too, don't you?
No. I'm not talking about junk DNA. I'm talking about chromosome 2 and how we showed definitively that it contains the.
I can send you evidence.
Telomeres.
I can show
you.
Yeah,
I bet it
hasn't been because I actually read the papers. I actually read the paper that
% different than the apes in our DNA too, don't you?
See, actually, we can show demonstrably over and over and over again that we have over 95% similarities with chimpanzees. But the point is hold on, with the telomeres, this was a prediction that we made based purely on the concept of common ancestry, and creationists, whether it's Jeffrey Tompkins or Jerry Bergman, because I've read their papers. No, I've read their papers. I know what they say, and they ignore data. They ignore, for instance, that the telomere is right next to a gene family, and where this gene family is only next to telomeres, and yet it's right there in the center of that chromosome.
Your paper has discredited that by geneticists. You better keep
by
up
whom?
Okay.
By
yeah,
whom?
By whom?
Is it Jeffrey Tompkins?
Yes, Jeffrey Tompkins has looked at it and several others.
Did you fact check Jeffrey Tompkins'
I've read his
claims?
papers.
Tell us how you fact check Jeffrey Tompkins' argument. How do you go about doing that, Mike?
I fact checked his papers with 2 other geneticists. So I did a
Okay.
whole
How do
video on
you
it.
do it, Mike?
John Sanford has looked at some of this, also Genesis. But here's
We
the
know
thing.
How
about
did
John
you fact
Sanford.
check John Sanford?
Well, let's go back to the DNA. Here's a question I have about your DNA. You say all these predictions and everything. Can you show me any observational evidence for that vast amount of information our DNA came from? Can you show me any observational evidence? We're talking about DNA. Where the
As
information
evidence?
come from?
What would you accept as evidence?
I'd accept observational evidence.
So if I could
And what would
present you
that
with
look
an
like?
example of a new protein or a new structure coming into existence, would you accept that as evidence?
New protein or structure? Well, we can have mutations, but they don't go the right way.
If I
How
can,
do you know
if I can
that?
demonstrate to you an example of a new structure that allowed for a selective advantage in a population, would you accept that as evidence? Because I can provide that example.
Well, first of all, selection doesn't, we know it doesn't do anything that unless
No,
it's
this is a
already there.
mutation that caused a structure that allowed for a selective advantage in a population. So would you consider that as evidence?
No, because I'm asking where the information came
So
from.
what would the evidence look like? What would you accept as evidence?
I'd like to see observational evidence, not hearsay that we
And what would that look like? Give us an example. Let's take the ALU pseudogene. Let's take that since there's so many of them. Are you claiming that any of the ALUs in our genome were deliberately designed there?
I'm saying the DNA information requires an intelligent sender. And
Are you okay? But are the ALUs deliberately designed information in our genome?
and they could be, yes, because they're not going to be added.
Or
Unless
might
they're
not be.
made
Are all
from
of them deliberately designed?
Yes. They're
Every
unless-
single one of them, including the ones that do diseases?
I would say all the information in our DNA that hasn't been corrupted was originally designed purposely by
Ooh, and how do you determine corruption?
corruption, mutations.
And
Even
what
if
could,
mutations
so if you
confer
have two
selective
strings of
advantage.
DNA,
We have thousands of diseases.
But Mr. Riddle, even if a mutation confers a selective advantage, do you still consider it a corruption?
Now, I have a question for you about this selective advantage. What is doing the selection?
Nature.
oh, nature doesn't it doesn't require an external thing.
The wind, the air, and rocks have intelligence. That's pretty far out now.
No.
No,
Oh,
Mr.
Mike. Answers in Genesis even accepts natural selection as a natural phenomenon. Don't get out on that game plan.
on it in here.
Genesis. I asked you a question.
Mr. Riddle.
Nature selects who or what is nature that it has intelligence.
Okay, you understand that nature is a combination of the space, the food resources that are available, predators, prey, parasites. These are all things that contribute to nature, the environment. These are all things that select.
Parasites, now, the parasites, do they make the selection?
Part of it, yes. Okay, Mr. Riddle.
I didn't know parasites made selection in our bodies.
Yes. Okay, think of it this way.
Where do they get their intelligence to do that?
Mr. Riddle, it's not intelligent. Think of a population of gazelles, okay? Now, there's variation within this population of gazelles. Some have shorter legs, some have longer legs. And there are lions, right? The lions want to eat the gazelle. Right, the lions want to eat the gazelle. So in this population, the gazelles with longer legs can run faster, so they escape the lions, which means that the ones with shorter legs are more likely to die off.
Sure.
So there's a selective. Okay, so that's natural selection. So the ones.
Okay, yes. Who's doing the selecting?
The lion. The lion is selecting his food because he can. What?
The lion's not selecting that gazelle to have shorter or longer legs. I want to
know. No, Mr. Riddle. The variations. The gazelles have genetic variations which are causing them to have shorter or longer legs. They're not choosing it. It's the genetic hand that they're dealt by their parents' sperm and egg.
And they can do that within limits.
Okay, so I just want to make the point about what natural selection is. So
tell me what it is.
The lion is not. He is not.
Give me a definition.
Natural selection is like differential reproductive success. That's the definition of natural selection.
Differential reproduction success, which means
reproductive success. That's what
you don't realize what it means, Mike.
The ones that produce the most are going to survive.
Not necessarily, because there's overpopulation, and generally individuals that overpopulate do so because they're more likely to die off, and their offspring are less likely to survive, like
Can I
flies,
ask
for
Mike a
instance.
question on this?
That gazelle determines it's going to have shorter or longer
No,
legs. How
no,
does
the gazelle does not determine that. The gazelle is dealt a certain set of
where'd
genes.
that come from?
Can I ask Mike a
Parents.
question relevant to this?
I'm trying to get to this natural selection business. You got to tell me what this thing is. How's it do the selecting, and who's doing the selection?
That's what I'm trying to do. That's what I'm trying to do. So the gazelle is born, right, from the parents, from a sperm and egg, and so that means the alleles from the parent are going into that gazelle and determine whether it gets the short or the long legs. And
so it's still a gazelle. So what? It's still a gazelle.
Yes, it is a gazelle. And so
it always stays a gazelle too. That's all they reproduce, gazelles.
Okay. So it's within a population of gazelles with short and long legs, right? Yep, and so you have lions, and lions are going to eat the gazelles that can't run very fast because they can't escape, right? They're going to get eaten.
No problem. That's not evolution, though.
Okay, so this is natural selection in a nutshell.
Okay.
The gazelle that have shorter legs are less likely to survive because they can't escape the lions, meaning that the population is, on average, going to trend towards gazelles having longer legs, because the ones that have longer legs are going to pass on that gene to their offspring. That is natural.
Gazelles. So what's the selection?
Yes, that is. No.
Still gazelles.
Yes, all I'm trying to explain is.
Can I ask a relevant question here, Jackson?
Yeah, one second, RJ. I'll let you. So that's all natural selection says. That's all it does. And so now, RJ, you can ask your question.
I'm curious to know. Sounds like you have a really serious miscomprehension of what natural selection does and what even creationists allow for within baraminology, for example. So, Mike, I'd like to ask you, what of the regular science works on this subject of selection and population genetics and all the rest of which it's a huge amount? What of this have you studied?
I have studied a good bit on natural selection. What I find out is who is the intelligent. I haven't found it where they're telling me.
What would be an example of a work that you have read on this subject?
I read a good bit about Randy Galusa and some of the universities now that are saying there's sensors in there that determine.
Whoa! I'm asking you on this particular technical point. What can you name a particular scientist or work or area where you had read about population genetics and the role of natural selection?
Well, John Sanford and Randy Galusa.
Those are creationists. Any of them in the regular scientific field, rather than something filtered through creationist perspective.
Are you saying all real scientists have to believe in evolution?
No, that isn't what I said. But if you are getting 100% of your argument from one side, and you're letting 100% of that argument tell you what the other side thinks, and you never read the other side to find out whether or not they're telling the truth, you're lopsided. You're like a flat earther that only studies flat earth.
Well, I've read the evolution accounts, and they talk about
such as
some of the same things. I've read some of their journals in the textbooks, what they call natural.
What would be one of the recent journals, science journals, that you've been reading in?
Well, I don't know if I can name them right off, but does that matter?
I can. Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, Science, Nature, Genetics, Nature, Ecology, and Evolution. There's thousands of them. And you can't name one off the bat.
Do anything. You're avoiding the issue. Tell me what natural selection is and who or what is doing that selection, where to get its information to select.
I just did.
Okay,
let me get
a whack at explaining
what you told me was what I believe about creation.
Let me get a whack at explaining it.
No, okay.
Mike?
The only natural selection is only one single part of evolution. It's not the entirety of evolution. It's not about organisms changing in species or things like that. Natural selection is solely about preserving genes and the environment acting on a certain.
How does it do that?
Like I just said, you have predators, you have prey, you have a certain amount of space in which they can live, you have food resources.
You're agreeing with creation now.
This is what natural selection is.
Mike, can I put in here, please?
Oh, thank you for coming over to my side now.
This isn't.
Can I get into here?
Yeah, go ahead.
Let's take a population of organisms. Name an animal that you've studied a lot, Mike.
I don't.
So we can use an example.
Let's say a dog. Dogs can.
Okay, well, those are artificial populations. Can you name a natural animal population that we could use as an example?
How about elephants?
Okay, let's take elephants, pachyderms.
Okay, now, do all elephants' progeny manage to pass on their genes to their descendants?
All of their genes?
All of a population of X elephants, how many of those will survive in the genes of their descendants? Will every single baby elephant survive and pass on genes to descendants at a 100% success rate?
No.
Okay, so it's less than 100%. Not all animals pass on their genes in the population of that genetic population. What determines which ones survive or not?
Well, there's a lot of forces. It could be lack of food, it could be a drought, there could be other creatures, predators, a lot of those things. But that has nothing to do with evolution.
And are those natural phenomenon?
Yes, just the way things
So
work.
an animal that dies and fails to pass on its genes because of a drought, or because a parasite has attacked it, or because it was a little slow in being attacked by a predator or something, all of those will depend on how it passes on its genes, correct?
And yes, they can all affect whether
that's the natural selection.
Has nothing to do with evolution, though.
It doesn't.
Yeah, well, yes, it is. Now, let's go to the next step. Let's go to the next.
So that is one mechanism, right? We have the gene pool
process, and you haven't done very well with it. You told me all about your agreeing with creation now with natural selection.
No, this isn't.
No,
about
don't go back to the mantra.
So we have the gene pool, and then we have the environment acting on the gene pool. So that's the first. That's the first two part. That is natural selection. That is the first two parts of evolution. Now, RJ, if you want to get to the next
evolution yet, you haven't equated. All you say is the survival of the fittest, which is not evolution.
It's not really survival of the fittest. It's more like
we weren't saying that term. Don't use an antiquated term like that, Mike.
That's what you were explaining to me.
No, it's not survival of the fittest.
It's creationist now.
Natural selection isn't survival of the fittest. It's survival of the fit.
Fit. What's the difference?
Well, the difference is that organisms have to compete with other members of their own population.
No problem. That's what we do in creation.
Okay.
So you're creationist.
Okay, so you have this population, you have a set of genes, and this population is being affected by the environment. That's natural selection.
Hot, cold weather, no problem.
Cold weather, yeah. Predators, prey, parasites, the weather, whatever. That's all.
Nothing to do with evolution yet.
Okay, so
I don't think anything is allowed to be evolution in his frame.
You described creation.
You have this one population, right?
Okay.
And so half the population decides to go north, the other half decides to go south.
Sure.
And so now they are no longer interbreeding with each other. Their genes are no longer coming into contact with each other. Okay. So
no problem.
Okay, so that's happening, and so they're both getting affected by the environment, but it might not be the same environment. These might be slightly different environments.
Not a problem with that either.
Okay, and so their genes are the genes that they are passing on to offspring as a whole, each population is going in different directions because they're being affected by different environmental pressures, different selective pressures.
Take part here. Let me see if I got this right. Take part of a gene pool, take it somewhere else. They didn't take the whole gene pool, so they may. The ones that go to a different environment may not have
all
the genes that were in the original.
Yes. Yeah, that's
evolution yet because you're still producing.
Alleles. They'll probably all have the same genes.
Yeah, they'll have the same genes, but not the same alleles, which is what that's genetic. That's called the founder effect, or
genes and avatars. A whole bunch of stuff going on in there.
Okay, so you have the genes, but not all the same alleles. So they're different alleles. And they're being affected by different environments.
Nothing has been created.
Okay.
They're still the same ones that were in the original population.
And so, because of the mutations that are accruing between the two in the separate populations, they eventually become unable to reproduce with each other anymore.
And thus, wait a minute.
We can observe it. It happens all the time.
Yeah, you can test those.
Yeah,
you can do testing. That's in the speciation literature that you haven't read any of, have you, Mike?
They're still the same creature, aren't they?
What do you mean the same creature?
Well, let's take Darwin's finches, for example.
Okay.
That's a pretty popular one.
Ooh, let's take those.
Okay,
I'm
so
ready for that.
In that example, so what Darwin did was he realized all the finches on the Galapagos Islands are descended from a species of finch from Ecuador, the mainland of Ecuador. So in the past, some population came from Ecuador and went to different parts of the islands where there are different environmental pressures. Like some parts are colder, some parts are hotter, closer to the ocean, it's desert, whatever. And they specialized on different food sources, right?
Yep.
Right. And so they became like Geospiza fortis is one. There's one that's called like is it yellow big bird or something like that? I think that's another one.
Yeah, I've forgotten all the different names. I'd have to look them up in words.
And so change a little bit, whatever.
So they eventually became unable to breed with each other, with the other populations, because certain mutations accrued in their different populations, so they can't interbreed anymore. They are different species now.
The drought was over? Did they breed after the drought was over?
Not all of them.
Can I ask a question of Mike on this?
And also, what did they start with? Finches. What did they end with? Finches. Where's the evolution?
Okay, well,
can I ask Mike a question on the finches?
Go ahead, RJ.
Yeah, does Mike accept that all of the Galapagos finches are physically descended from South American finches?
I don't know that. Doesn't matter. They're finches.
It does matter.
Why?
Okay, how far back do you have to go before it ceases to be a finch? Have you studied any of bird systematics?
No, I haven't. But Darwin's finches.
How then can you render an opinion on it?
So, first of all, you don't have a mechanism for it to change from one creature to another.
No, that's incorrect. We do have the mechanisms.
Because you don't have a selection process that does evolution yet. You haven't.
That's natural selection. We just covered this.
Selection is the fit survive and the less fit don't survive.
Yes, that's natural selection.
What did they start with and what did they end up with? See, you're being a creationist, is the way I see.
No, this isn't about becoming a new species.
Give up on evolution because you don't have a mechanism yet.
Natural selection
is finches.
Question.
Go ahead. You haven't done a very good job here.
Let's take one of the problems, of course, is speciation is a very slow process, and as a young Earth creationist, you don't allow millions of years, so we're not in that circumstance. But would you agree that an animal with a reptile jaw layout and a mammal with a mammal jaw layout, which are very, very different, that to get from that law through to the mammal layout is a macroevolutionary phenomenon and would qualify as evolution by your definition?
No, not at all.
I have a question. What is evolution by your definition?
What you find are fossils, then you paint a picture in. But secondly, you haven't given me a mechanism for that change.
Yes, we have.
What is?
Yes, we have.
RJ, I don't think we've established what his definition of evolution is.
Yeah, I can't figure it out.
Could you give us a definition, please?
That's what we have to have for evolution. We have to have a beneficial mutation that's going to add new functional genetic information, has to survive and be able to replicate itself. Without that,
got all that.
So, are you aware of new species form sometimes when they lose parts?
We do speciation. I have no problem with that. Within limits, they still say the same creature.
So, are you aware that new species can form whether you develop new structures or whether you lose structures?
Structures is not the point here, because you can have an extra arm.
I'm just asking you. Are you aware that new species can form whether they gain genes or lose genes?
I wouldn't. Let's put it this way: speciation within limits. They stay the same.
What is the limits?
Limits. In other words, you can have a dog change into a cow.
So,
why dogs?
You can't change an elephant into a giraffe.
Well, okay, so on our finches,
you can't change a dinosaur into a bird.
Okay, so for our finches,
we
can we go back to our finch? Let's go back to our finches example. So, would you say that finches are related to grosbeaks?
I'd say finches related to finches. I don't know about the other birds, but they're still finches.
Why wouldn't they be related to grosbeaks? What is preventing them from being related to each other?
I don't know. You tell me.
Even though we have the genetics and morphological data. What'd you say, RJ?
I said, I'm asking Mike, have you ever once read a technical paper on speciation?
No, I haven't, but you haven't told me anything
about it. Then why do you think you can express an opinion on a technical subject when you are literally missing 100% of the data field?
Because you can't explain it, that's why.
We've already been doing that.
But we can. If you read the papers, you would see we do.
Guys,
elephants stay elephants. You haven't told me anything other than that.
So
What?
Take elephants, Jackson. That's your field.
I did a video on elephants too. So would you consider, since we have genetic data for it, would you consider modern African elephants and woolly mammoths to be the same, to both be elephants?
I believe they come from the same family. They're pachyderms.
Okay. So would you consider them to both be related to gomphotheres?
I don't know what those are.
It's another group of elephants.
More
which
data
we
he
have
doesn't
genetic
know.
data.
I'd have to look at the genes and have somebody explain that to me.
Would you?
But, so you
Would
get
you
this,
consider? Well,
you're
hold on.
trying to get specifics.
Hold-
I want to know how.
Well, Mike,
evolution
Science is specifics, Mike.
I
You
want to
don't
ask.
get
So would
Yeah,
you consider? So would you consider African elephants, mammoths, and mastodons to all be elephants?
I'd say there's a pretty good chance that I'm going to say elephants, pachyderms.
So would you consider Dinotherium to also be related to all of them?
Who's Dinotherium? What was that?
What about
Well, we just
do you
know.
know about
A lot.
Merotherium?
I don't know any of those. But
Okay, well they're fossil elephants.
It really doesn't matter whether they're related or not. What matters is how does one creature
It does
change?
matter. It does
it
matter,
doesn't.
Mike.
It does matter.
Everything you're saying is on faith.
Okay, Mike.
You're giving me your faith. You're not giving
Mike.
me good sound arguments. For
We have
that.
faith that we've never read any of the science work, Mike. Let me go get a drink.
It doesn't,
We,
doesn't
so-
matter whether I read the science. What matters is you can't explain what you believe.
Okay, so Mike, so the evolutionary process is built mostly in its simplified form on gene pool that is experiencing mutations, natural
Okay.
selection, and speciation.
Okay, you said natural selection again. All
That's what you
told
were
me was
describing
natural
earlier.
selection. What does natural selection do?
That's precisely what you agree with.
What is the intelligence? And they're making the so-called selection.
No, selection is just a term that we have prescribed to this process.
What's
That's
the
all.
process? Where's the intelligence for that process come from?
No. Selection is just a term that we are using to describe it. Okay. Would you say that an
Selection implies
enzyme?
selection, which implies an intelligence behind it to do the
Okay.
selection. What is that?
So, Mike,
You
you
should
are
try to
familiar
do
with
some.
origin of life arguments. You're familiar with origin of life arguments, so you're familiar with enzymes, right?
Somewhat, yes.
Okay, so enzymes are very specific in the substrate that they need to have to perform a function, right?
Yes.
So are they actively, intelligently choosing the substrate that they are getting to perform that function, or are they getting that substrate?
No, they're not doing
Out
the
of-
decision making.
So they're not decision making, right?
Enzymes don't have the intelligence in to do that decision making.
Right.
Where's the intelligence
Exactly. Exactly.
Where is
They're
it?
not intelligently doing it. There is no intelligence involved in the process. This is about chemicals running into each other.
Okay, so you got selection has no intelligence. So how can it decide?
No,
what's good?
it doesn't.
So can
So-
it decide what's good and beneficial or not? The selection decide what's
What
Define
what is
beneficial.
beneficial is a term that we subjectively ascribe to certain mutations
Yeah.
if they confer a benefit to a population of organisms.
how does it
For example,
benefit? How does it know it's a benefit if it doesn't have any intelligence?
It doesn't
It have
need
to
to
know
know.
yeah, they keep living and reproducing, and that's how they know.
Okay, then we have a problem there.
mean-
Would you say most mutations are beneficial to an organism?
I didn't say that.
Okay, I
Most
just
of them are
want-
neutral.
Yeah, most are neutral.
Most are neutral.
There's quite a few detrimental ones too. And what would you
Yeah,
say? the
and they
ratio
automatically weed out.
and detrimental to beneficial ones? Would you say it's a pretty big ratio of neutral and detrimental to?
Oh,
beneficial?
if you're trying to invoke Sanford on this subject, you're barking up the wrong tree because he got his numbers wrong.
No, he actually didn't. You got his
He
numbers
did.
pretty good when you take a look
You
at
didn't
population.
check though, did you?
If we're getting
Fess
a
up,
high
tell us. You
level
didn't check,
of
did you?
neutral and detrimental
Well,
mutations,
Mr.
what's
Riddle,
population.
Mr. Riddle, he was trying to use the neutral theory of mutations, but then he ignored like the number of beneficial mutations that actually occur. He also ignored the effect. What didn't he?
When you say beneficial now, you got to describe me what you mean by beneficial.
So okay, for
Oh,
instance,
any point mutation would be an example of it. The one that produces the antifreeze protein in fish is a single point mutation. If that ain't beneficial, nothing would be.
Is it common as a gain or a loss?
Oh, it's a gain of function.
Gain of function, but is it a gain in information?
what is
well,
this
define
information?
information. Let's go back to ALUs then. Do all the ALUs in your genome have the same information?
I don't know on that, but use the word information. Could you tell me what
10%
information?
of them are you. You should pay attention to this.
So
Well,
how do we define information, Mr. Riddle?
Okay, I
Yeah.
can give you the attributes of it. It has to have a code, like in our DNA. It has to have
So-
some meaning. It has to have some expected action.
I mean,
Okay.
pseudogenes would fit that definition then because they have an
Yeah.
expected action, but they're broken.
An intended purpose.
RNA viruses would even.
Yeah.
They're not even alive.
Do they have a
Kind
code?
of, sort of.
Yes, I mean they are DNA. Yes.
Yeah.
What I mean by meaning is if I were to say the word chair, the word has meaning. It's not the information, it's not the physical chair, but it means something physical. That's what I mean by meaning. So it has some code,
So
meaning, expected
Define
action,
chair.
chair. Okay. We can define chair a lot of ways. We could have 4 legs and a back.
so are
But
you
what I'm-
Mhm.
are you saying that it has to produce an amino acid? It has to be a sequence that a protein producing sequence?
the DNA is made up of what we call information. It has a code. It
I
has
wouldn't
meaning.
say it's made up of information.
Then you don't know what information is. Can you describe it to me then? What is
You
it?
don't either.
No,
Mr.
I don't know because I don't use that term because and geneticists don't use that term.
I can give you the only attributes about information that work in all technological and biological systems in the world. You
We
can't.
actually have a geneticist in the chat right now, and so I have to ask him: Do you use information in genetics?
Oh, they do
Term
use
that's
information.
commonly used.
Absolutely, they do. I won't doubt that.
Well, you're not a geneticist, Mike. Don't tell us what geneticists do. We're trying to ask the geneticist.
Okay.
Yeah. So I asked him. We'll see if he responds.
Yeah.
So pseudogenes basically are strands of DNA that used to have function, but they're broken. So they had this thing that they used to do, a job they used to do. Like for instance, we have one called gulo, which used to allow us to metabolize ascorbic acid, but it's broken, and so we can't, or synthesize. Sorry, not metabolize. We can't synthesize it anymore because our gene is broken. So would you consider that pseudogene, since it has an expected function but is broken, is composed of DNA code? Would you consider that information?
If it has the 4 attributes, code,
Oh,
meaning.
also, the geneticist responded. He said, "I don't. A few do in certain contexts, but not this one." So there's your answer.
Okay.
Thank you,
you.
Rational.
Well, geneticists have a pretty good handle on some of these things, but I know that we still have a lot of problems that you haven't solved in your arguments yet. And I
Well,
can't accept evolution because you haven't given me a mechanism for how it happens.
Well,
So,
let's
do you wanna
talk.
go back?
Can I bring in the jaw transition again, because there's a perfect example of a mechanism, and we've got all the components of it.
I would say they were
You've
created
got
that way. I would say they were created that way, or it's a mutation, a bad mutation. I'd say
okay. So God
mechanism.
made the probanignathids. He really loved evolutionists more than creationists because he insisted on making transitional forms that exactly match the prediction. Is that plausible?
I wouldn't say that's exactly match addition. I'd say we find fossils, and then the evolutionists claim it's a transition.
Well,
No,
let's talk
the
about
thing
it.
is-
Go to
Let's see.
Piltdown, man. How about
Well, what
Piltdown?
RJ's saying is
Are
that
they around?
these, what
How about
RJ's
the-
saying is that these fossils, these scientists, these paleontologists, had an idea that these fossils should exist long before they ever found them, and that if common ancestry is true, if mammals are in fact derived from reptiles, this thing should exist. And then they went out years later and they found it.
Well, how much of the bone did they find?
They
All of
have
it.
complete skulls now.
You haven't looked at it. Let's start with the basics here.
Well, the basics are you don't have a
Describe for us,
mechanism
Mike.
for evolutionary change.
I'll get to the mechanism. Let's get some basics out of the way because I'm not sure you have any of the basics. Describe what distinguishes a reptile jaw from a mammal jaw. How would we tell them apart?
Scientifically, I can't tell you, but
Yeah.
to me, you got mammals, you got reptiles, and there's no mechanism how one can go to the other. So you
Oh,
don't.
no, that's not true. And I'm starting out with the fact that you don't seem to understand the basics of the thing. You can't even explain what it is you're dismissing. Are you telling me you cannot describe, if you go into a museum, and you have said you have gone into museums, that
Yes.
you would not be able to tell a mammal skull and a mammal jaw, bingo, just by sight, because they're so different from reptiles? Wouldn't you know that?
Probably would, yes.
Well,
Probably
what's the
would.
difference then? Tell us how you would tell them apart. What would you look for?
Reptiles have more of a elongated type
No, that's
skull.
not necessarily true.
But here's the problem. I don't know all the
So
little
how do you
bits,
tell them apart?
but I do know that there's a creator God and there's no mechanism for evolution, which you have
Mr.
told
Riddle?
me.
Evasion.
Well,
Is
How do you tell
unfounded.
them apart?
You're making
I
up
can do it.
You're just
Well,
making up stories.
Mr. Riddle, I have a question. Mr.
When
Riddle, I
you
have a
stop
question.
making up stories, we can get somewhere. So far, you haven't explained the origin of life. You haven't explained
I
the
can't get
selection.
you onto the data field, Mike.
Mr.
Well, you
Riddle,
don't-
I have
There's no mechanism.
Mr. Riddle, I have a question.
Sure.
How, and this came from Peter. Thanks, Peter. In your mind, how do you think evolution works? How do you think our model of evolution works?
It doesn't. It's without
No,
a
that's
mechanism.
not what I'm asking. I'm asking what are the steps that you think it goes through according to our model that produces new species?
You're supposed to have millions and millions of years, which you can't verify.
That's
then
not the
you have-
biologic aspect. What are the biologic aspects of it?
Then you have mutations, and every once in a while, I keep reading this, there's a beneficial mutation that gets selected for. And over millions of years, you keep having that process, and it keeps benefiting the organisms for a better survival rate, and you have your new species. But that's a bunch of baloney.
What if I told you we can demonstrate that that still happens today, and we have still been observing that process?
I'd say you're a liar.
Well, I'm not, because there are lots of papers. Are you familiar with the African cichlids of Lake Malawi, Lake Tanganyika, and Victoria?
No mechanism for one kind to change you into a completely
That's
new
not
kind.
what we're asking about. We're talking about species.
That's evolution.
Because
Speciation, I have no problem with to an
okay,
extent.
so all we're
Let's talk
asking
Darwinian
for
evolution. Macro evolution. Let's talk that. That's what we're talking about here.
macroevolution.
I was trying to on the reptile mammal transition, but I can't get you onto that field.
You did, and I said describe how it happened, and you couldn't.
We did.
Okay, I'll have to jump because he ignores the data. Let me jump to it. We can physically observe the exact mechanism of how the reptile jaw turned into the mammal jaw. The expansion of the dentary bone was directly due to the selection pressure of insectivores. There's a physical dynamic of insectivore jaws that selects for long, narrow tooth with backwards curvations. We physically can experiment it. We can physically measure the stress dynamics of probanognaathids. There are technical literature on it, and I know for a fact zero creationists, zero intelligent designers have ever cited any of that information. So because you depend entirely on creationists for your viewpoint, you don't know any of this information, and you're trying to tell somebody who knows this data exists that it doesn't exist.
I would call what you just said a great big bluff. You just said selection pressure. What do you mean by selection pressure? And it selects.
I just said yes. Let me explain it. When a insectivore, you bite on an insect, a long, narrow dentary cascade will bite in it, and the very act of jumping down on it will pull the object into the mouth. That was causing the expansion of the dentary bone in the insectivores, and they were indeed insectivores. You can tell that from the kinds of teeth that were involved. And only later on is what?
Had nothing to do with natural selection.
Yes, it does. What else is natural selection? Are you telling me that organisms don't eat? That a differential organism, the ability to bite a bug better, doesn't cause a bug biter to live better than a non-bug, than eating a bug badly? Are you telling me that isn't natural selection? What do you think is?
Now you're telling me you believe in creation again. That's all you're telling me.
No. Mike, stop giving that claptrap.
How did it become a new kind?
Mike,
tell me,
Mike.
How many
what you are
kinds
calling? Well, hold on, RJ. Hold on. What you are calling creationism? This is natural selection. The differential reproductive success of organisms, whether you want to call that creationism or natural selection, that is how organisms are selected in an environment based on their attributes, based on their physical and genetic attributes. That is one of the mechanisms of evolution, because you start with your gene pool. The gene pool is selected for. And if the population splits,
you have an answer. How does it select?
We did. We have done that. We have done that several times.
You just don't listen.
Several different examples. I gave the example.
Doing the selecting.
No. I gave the example.
We don't have any until you can explain this. You have not explained natural selection. You're bluffing your way through. You're going to sidetrack.
I'm not.
don't have a mechanism.
Mr. Riddle, I explained this with
No,
the
you
example of the
explain it.
gazelles.
Creationist sense. I don't call it natural selection. I call it
You don't have to. We can call it gobbledygook, but it's still a process that is.
programmed information that was in there from the very beginning.
We can call it anything we want. The point is that these are genes, alleles getting selected for by
Who?
the environment.
No, the environment, does it have intelligence? Who is
It
the
doesn't
environment?
have
You're
to.
back again. Mike,
Remember-
you're around the same mulberry bush. You're around the same merry-go-round. You're making a fool of yourself.
Mr. Riddle,
What is the environment?
Mr. Riddle, do you remember my example with the enzymes?
Sure.
Are enzymes
You didn't explain anything
consciously-
other than what we believe in creation. You haven't
are
explained.
enzymes consciously selecting their substrate?
No, they're not.
No,
So
they are not
who's
consciously.
selecting? And who's
Are
your
you going to tell me?
intelligence?
Are you going to tell me that God is pushing around the enzymes to get their substrate?
I'm telling you this: that God is the creator of all things. He
That's
created
not relevant.
everything was perfect.
That's
And
not relevant.
The creation became corrupted, and because of that corruption, we have mutations and we
Mr.
have
Riddle,
going on. That's what I'm telling you.
He's on to the dogma mode now.
You have
Mr.
not
Riddle,
been able to refute that.
Mr. Riddle, that's not relevant. What is relevant is
No,
this-
it is. It's more relevant than what you're telling me.
this
because if you're
enzyme.
I can
this-
talk about my creator God who created everything perfectly.
This enzyme is looking for a specific substrate, right?
How does it look? How does it know to look?
Does
Because
it need to know how to look?
because
it
it is-
does what it does.
RJ's right. It doesn't need to know. It is not conscious, right? As we've established,
It's
it is not.
know what to do.
No, it knows what to
Can
do
I ask
only
a
because of
question?
the chemical, only because of its chemical makeup.
Oh,
Its
now you're
chemical
Can I ask a
makeup
question,
determines
Mike?
what it does.
instructions to know what to do here. All these things inside a cell have to have instructions to know what to do.
Okay,
What is your intelligence for selection still?
That's
I want
not
to
the-
know that. Yes,
we're
it
not
is.
talking about where the DNA came from. We're talking about
Yes, we are.
how
Where the DNA
does the enzyme
Right.
how
These
does the
origins are
enzyme
bust. Can I ask a
how does
question?
how does the enzyme know how to find the substrate? Do you
Yes.
know the answer to that? How does it do that?
I think it's pre-programmed in there by Creator God.
Is it
Yeah,
the
but
chemicals? Is
I
it
know-
the chemicals within the enzyme that determine how it finds its substrate?
Where'd that information come from?
It doesn't matter. I'm asking,
It does.
is it the chemicals that
no, we
determine it?
All life is dependent on information. It's information that makes us alive.
Are
It's a
the
key part.
chemicals determining how it finds a substrate, or is it consciously looking for substrate?
It's called information. It has to have.
It's the
a set of
chemicals, right?
No,
Because it
chemicals
is
are
not
just all
consciously selecting the substrate.
chemicals are chemicals.
Can I give an example from bacterial resistance and the dynamics of that?
You're
Go ahead,
in
Archie.
a quagmire right now. You
Yeah,
don't have a mechanism. You haven't said anything.
well, you don't allow there to be a mechanism. I'll just point this out, Mike. That if you look at, say, the bacterial system, if you look at the chloroquine resistance case that was discussed by Michael Behe in his book, he neglected to notice the details of it. You have a tube that functions as a channel for material coming into the parasite, and it turns out that its resistance can build on point mutations that are occurring that alter the dynamics of how it funnels material through. Now, unless you're arguing that God is explicitly designing these mutations to make people ill in bacterial resistance, I think it's a natural phenomenon, and exactly those same mechanisms are involved in every single level of the biology, which, as far as I can tell, you've never bothered to study, and that would include the developmental biology of the mammal jaw, the developmental biology of all the brain systems and the synapses. There's a gigantic technical literature, and your side ignores almost all of that literature. I don't have to guess at it, I'm measuring it. I wanted to ask you the question, though, how many kinds are there? You mentioned kinds. How many kinds were created?
Well, I don't have the original kind because I wasn't there.
Okay, well, there's several benchmarks on it.
I'd say there's probably several thousand kinds.
Don't you think there would be a way for us to infer today how many kinds there were based on the available data around today?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so because there's been so much
Why
corruption.
not? You're denying the baraminologist can work out kinds? Do you read much of the baraminology literature, Mike?
Just a very little, and I think they're going to have a tough time doing that.
Doing what? Why? How well? Let's take that reptile mammal transition. How would you delineate what kind of kinds there were there? And where are they now, by the way?
I've not. There's a lot of things that have gone extinct. We have
Why
to
have
look
they
at
gone extinct?
Well, a lot of various reasons. Other animals killed them. We killed them. They just couldn't survive.
Mhm.
In
How many of the kinds on board the Ark went extinct?
After the Ark, I don't know how many kinds were on the Ark. I would guess to say maybe a few thousand kinds.
But how many of them went extinct afterwards? I already know the answer to this because Answers in Genesis actually has a list.
Okay. Then give me the answer. I'd
They
say
had about 1,500 kinds on the Ark, and 54% of them, by their own list, went extinct. The Ark was not doing a very good job of protecting life.
well, the creatures that went on the Ark came off the Ark, and then they went extinct.
Okay. So how many dinosaur kinds were on the Ark, do you think? You have said you were kind of a dinosaur expert.
Now maybe there's only about 50 to 100 different kinds of dinosaurs. I know we're still working some of that out, and that's
okay. Are psittacosaurids? What kind are psittacosaurids? Are they the same kind as protoceratopsids?
Don't know.
And are protoceratopsids the same kind as ceratopsids?
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't
It
matter.
does matter.
So you have.
It does
So
matter.
you're not contending, therefore, that kindology or your version of creationism is even slightly useful for understanding any past life, are you?
Mr. Riddle, it matters because if we want to understand who's in what kind, we have to know who's in what kind.
That's
And
good
so-
science. I think that's good study of science. I think
Okay.
science is very good.
You know what?
But
I
if
agree.
we start assuming things and talking as facts, we get a problem.
Mr. Riddle, what he's trying to point out is that there is no understanding of what organisms fall into what kind. Like the example I gave earlier with the finches and the grosbeaks are, like I said, do you think, even though there's much genetic and morphological similarity between finches and grosbeaks, do you think they're related to each other?
We'd have to look at the DNA to get a better
Do you
examination.
think that
And they
ostriches
have.
are related to emus?
Could be. I don't know.
Do you
Take
think
the
that
horse
kakapo-
example, horse sequence.
Do you think that the kakapo is related to the sulfur-crested parakeet or cockatoo, whatever
None
it
of
is?
this is even relevant to what we're talking about here.
It
So
is,
let's
because
get
I'm
back
trying to determine what you think is related to each other.
I believe there was a worldwide flood,
We want to
and God put all
apply
the
your
on the ark.
view.
But based on what the Bible teaches, and I believe the Bible is true, it's God's
We know
word.
that.
Yes, I believe it, and that's a faith issue. There's a faith issue there. I have to accept, but I believe the Bible agrees with reality, and I don't believe evolution agrees with reality. I think there's too many holes. Like, where did the matter come from to create the universe? How did life originate? Where did the dinosaurs come from? The Cambrian explosion.
Oh, the
really
dinosaurs
just
came from. You haven't looked at the latest paleontology, there, have you?
I've looked at a lot of dinosaur books. I've been to a lot of
So-
museums.
But
Can I
have
ask
you looked
you,
at any of the
have you
recent
heard of-
work on the paleontology that's been discovered in the last 20 years on the origins of the dinosaur forms?
I've got a lot of dinosaur books in my library here. Some within the
but
last
on
20
this issue,
have you heard about Marasuchus?
No.
Have you heard about the Logopedids?
They go off, and it doesn't matter because when I go to the museums, when I
there's
see,
nothing. The data doesn't matter to Mike.
Well,
Mr.
let me
It
Riddle,
doesn't matter ever.
what I see for transitions are already reptiles. Their leg position just a little bit different, but they're already reptiles. You haven't shown me the lineage leading up to these 4-footed creatures, the 2-footed meat eaters. You haven't shown me.
Yes, we do. You haven't looked.
I've looked everywhere and can't find them. You're bluffing again.
Oh, Mike, take out your Bible now and swear on it in imperilment of your eternal damnation. How many technical papers have you read on the phylogeny of dinosaurs that have been written in the last 20 years?
I would say that's a pretty stupid question because it's irrelevant.
No, it isn't. I contend you have not read anything in this area. Now, prove me wrong. Prove me a liar. Tell me what you have read in this
Can
area.
you show me observational the transitions leading up to a T-Rex? I should see hundreds of creatures leading up to that one. And
If
to
you
a
don't look at the
dinosaur.
data, how would you know? You never look at the data. You didn't know about the reptile-mammal transition.
Doesn't matter because it can't be a transition if it's there's
Oh,
no.
yes, it can. Let's take horses. Do you accept the horse evolution sequence or not?
That's just baloney. The
Tell-
horse
well,
sequence.
yeah, but yes or no?
Mr.
Yes or
Riddle,
no?
have you
Do
read this
accept
book?
the horse evolution sequence from
Absolutely.
Heracitherium on?
No.
Mr. Riddle, have you read this book?
No, I haven't.
Okay,
Right,
so
I've read
one of
I've got a
the
lot.
first, the second chapter, the second chapter of this book is on the archosaurs that gave birth to the dinosaurs, and it mentions a number of them.
Yeah, the archosaurs. I've looked at those, and what is an
Have you really?
What does an archosaur look like?
Birds are archosaurs.
Give us how you would identify an archosaur. What are the characteristics of archosaurs?
Look very similar to a dinosaur, doesn't it? So where'd they come from?
In what way similar?
Very similar. So where'd they come from?
In what way? Are they purple? Are they perpendicular? Do they have a spiegelborp? What is it that's so similar about them?
The skeletal shape is very similar to a dinosaur. Matter of fact, it looks like a dinosaur. The stegosaur dinosaur.
Okay. So in what respects are those on the horse sequence? What I just don't want to pin this down. On the horse sequence, do you or do you not accept that Horacotherium through Dinohippus, all the rest up to Equus, is that an evolutionary sequence that you accept or not?
Absolutely not, because they all look like horses, except the first one, Eohippus.
Oh.
But we find them.
So you accept that they are related or not?
Except that they're related, just like we have big horses and we have medium-sized horses and little horses. They all live in the same time.
An animal can go from a tiny animal that has 5 toes all the way down to a single animal that has only one main toe and that has a different tooth structure. That all of that can occur as a natural evolutionary sequence. You agree?
Sure. If they have the genetics in there already to do that, yes, not a problem.
Now, explain to me how basal synapsids can't manage to get all the way to basal mammals and not do exactly what we can see in those transitional forms like the Cro-Magnathids and Diarthrognathids.
Well, let me explain the horses again. Maybe you'll get this time. We have medium-sized horses and big horses. We have variety within kind. Just look at the human population, the variety we have in kind, the different amounts of melanin, the sizes and shapes of people. Look at the dog population. We vary.
Okay, so why aren't synapsids and mammals the same kind?
They could be. I don't know. I haven't studied that one. So if there's
of course you haven't studied them because you don't study any of this.
So you said it's possible. So you did say it's possible that synapsids could be mammals. They could be in the same kind as mammals.
I don't know.
That's macroevolution.
No, I said I don't know. But also, I'm going to go back to there's no mechanism for one kind to become a new kind. Understanding.
And I say that's bullpucky.
You haven't explained.
Speciation and natural variation is all it takes, literally. I defy you to go through the reptile-mammal transition and tell me where the load limit of natural branching speciation and natural selection is exceeded. No creationist has ever done so. Krieger couldn't do it at Creation Wiki. I'd like to see you try it.
I'd like to see anybody in the evolution come up with a
We've already done it.
No, all you did is bluff your way through.
No, you're declaring a bluff when you have not shown that.
Mr. Riddle, I ask you, you can go look at, literally look up the mechanism of evolution on Google.
I've looked up the mechanisms. All they say is natural selection causes evolution, and they give it selection. They give it
natural selection is a part of evolution. It's not evolution in and of itself.
Yes, you have to have mutations in natural selection. Well, first of all, you got to tell me where all the information DNA came from through the mutations that we have. Secondly, the selection process. Who or what is the intelligence? You haven't explained that to me.
You're back off. You can't get off of this, Mike. You are so locked into this. This is like Jeranism on flat Earth.
Well, that's too bad because you can't explain it. You're trying to bluff your way through. And this is what evolutionists typically do. If they can't answer something, they try and go somewhere else.
We are explaining things up the yin yang. We can explain the origin of dinosaurs. We can explain the origin of horses. We can explain the origin of the reptile mammal transition. We can explain the origin of birds. We can do all of this. We have the technical papers. We have the genetics. Do you know anything about paleogenomics?
You explain it's how artists draw pictures, like Piltdown Man.
No. Don't insult. Don't act a discipline from afar. Do not malign paleontologists and developmental biologists and geneticists. Don't insult people.
Mistakes, big mistakes. So why should we trust you on any of this? Let's go back to
what was the big mistake?
Coelacanth was a big mistake.
Wait, what was?
Says who?
Archaeoraptor. You pasted on feather imprints to make it.
No, Mr. Riddle, do you know the history of Archaeoraptor? Because I did a video on that also, and I've actually met one of the scientists who debunked it. Nobody, no scientist, no paleontologist was ever fooled by Archaeoraptor.
It was in National Geographic then.
Because Sylvia Zurkis bought it for $80,000.
Tell it, Mike. Have Mike tell his version of Archaeoraptor, and then we'll see how much of the points he gets. Have him explain it.
National Geographic promoted as the transition.
But why?
The bird.
Why?
Why? Because they wanted to believe in evolution without the facts.
So does it matter
Okay,
that
who found
absolutely none of the paleontologists who studied it, who all determined that it was a fake, not one of them thought it should go in anything?
How do you know not one of them? Did you
Because
talk to them all?
because I
Because
have
we've
done
surveyed it.
yeah
No,
because
you-
we
Ask
surveyed-
Mike about the fossils that composed Archaeoraptor.
I've
Tell us
even
about the
met-
fossils that were used to make Archaeoraptor.
do you know what fossils were that made Archaeoraptor?
No, it doesn't matter what got
Microraptor and was it Yanornis was the other one?
Yeah,
Why
I
was-
think so. It was one
So-
was a Jurassic bird and all.
So do you know why
So tell us about
Microraptor?
Microraptor, Mike.
Do you know why that was important? Why Microraptor was important?
Well, all I've known is you haven't found any actual feathers.
Do you
with
know
that.
why? Actually, yes, we have, and even creationists admit to that.
You don't even have a mechanism that can change a scale into a feather yet.
Actually, we
Wrong,
do.
wrong,
We've
wrong,
been through all that.
wrong.
Yeah, we do,
You like the
actually.
technical papers, Mike?
I've
Have you read the work of Alan Brush and Richard Prum?
I've read enough information to know that there's been a lot of frauds.
Tell me about their argument. Tell me about Prum and Brush's argument on the evolutionary origin of feathers.
What they have found so far are little fibrous things, but they have little hairs, but they haven't found one case where a scale has changed into a feather.
Do you know what
You've
caudipteryx is?
seen the work where they've genetically altered the scales to show how feathers originate from them? Are you aware of that literature, Mike?
I don't think there's any real literature out there. I think you're bluffing again.
You should catch up with the last 20 years. Are you aware that the proto feathers have been found in amber too?
Proto feathers, birds.
Nope, from dinosaurs.
No, they aren't. They're a proto feather predicted in Prum and Brush's model. Are you aware of the work of Alibardi?
I'm aware that we find scales and we found feathers.
Are you aware of the work of Alibardi? Yes or no?
Any news? No, I'm not aware of that, but I haven't found any
So
news.
is it correct to say that of the technical literature on the evolution of feathers written in the last 20 years, you have read none of it?
No, I've read some articles on it, but what I keep reading is they make a statement. Then
Well,
they
give us an example of one.
remember all
What technical work have you read?
I've read textbooks.
You can't remember any of it? Can you remember any of the people, the names of people on this?
Well, first of all, one of you made the statement. You've talked to all the paleontologists. Can you name them all?
Yeah.
Name every
Oh
one.
gosh, would you like me to go? I keep track of the 60,000 scientists that write these technical papers. I could compile a list if you really want.
Know them off the top of your head right now. Can you start naming them?
Oh, well, right off the hand, Norell at the American Museum of Natural History. We've got Broussard.
Stop asking me for what I read. You make it a claim, then I'm going to ask you to support it. But you still have not solved the key problem here, gentlemen. And
If
you're
you say
bluffing your way through.
abiogenesis is not the problem.
Abiogenesis is a major problem.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is. And if you're going to make
It's
that
origins or
claim,
bust.
I'm
You
gonna
can't
publish
do
your
anything
name.
else.
I'm going to
Hold
put
on,
your name on my next letter that says 2 people have said life can originate by naturalistic processes.
Who
Can I
said
use-
what?
Can I use your names on that?
Mhm.
That you believe
Yes, and if you you send a copy to Jackson and he will forward it to me, and if you bear false witness by misrepresenting our position, we're going to be down on you like white on rice.
Let me ask this question. Do you believe abiogenesis is true?
I suspect it is, but it doesn't matter on the origin of the reptile-mammal transition because we already have amniotes, we already have DNA, we already
So
have
there you go.
homeobox.
We
We
are
don't
not-
need to know how that originates.
So, Mr. Riddle, what you are hearing is we are not saying we are definitely sure that abiogenesis occurred. We are not saying that. We are saying we suspect.
It's
What?
a faith. You have a faith that
No.
it happened. Yes,
No.
you do. Yes, you do.
I don't.
No,
You know what
we
the
have a
definition of
reasonable
faith-
science.
Can you show
Would
me
you like
any
me to give an
observational
explanation
evidence
for
how
it?
life originated?
Actually,
Observational evidence how life
What do you-
originated.
what do you mean by
Tackle
observational?
Can we observe it and repeat it?
There are actually lots of experiments we've done regarding the origin of life that we can.
Name one
Okay.
that-
The protocell experiment by Jack Szostak is one of them, where he took he took a chemical and facilitated the movement of molecules into a protocell.
What
That
did
was
he
one of
start? What did he start with?
You're
Have
just
you
going
read
to
any
keep
of his
going back
work?
and back and back. The
Have
point,
you
which
read
is a
any-
which is a sidestep of the issue, because you asked me to provide an example, which I
No.
did. I provided an example. Now, just
provided a
because you want to move the goalpost back and back and back doesn't mean I didn't provide you an example.
Sorry, son, but that's abiogenesis. From raw chemicals to a living cell. That's abiogenesis. You gave me starting equipment. You've got to start with raw chemicals and get me one biological protein or DNA. You can't do that. So you believe by
That's
faith?
why they're
or you
addicted to
believe by
origins
observance?
or bust.
No scientist on this planet has created a living cell or a biological protein.
Absolutely, I agree with that. And even if we do, no creationist is going to accept abiogenesis. They have all. No, Mr. Riddle. The reason. No, Mr. Riddle. The reason isn't that we can't do it. The reason is that even if we could, they would say, "Aha!" All that.
Stop right there.
No,
You're
Mr. Riddle.
Mama land now.
No. I want to tell you exactly what young Earth creationists. I want to tell you what young Earth creationists have said. What they say is that even if we could produce a cell by whatever scientific means, they still wouldn't accept abiogenesis because they would say that's just intelligent design. So even if we could do it, they would never accept abiogenesis.
Say you can't do it.
That's not the point.
Now you can't do it. Tell me that.
And
Or
I
you
can't explain the mammal transition.
I want to get this down in writing. Can you tell me that scientists today can produce a living cell?
No one has done it. No one's even attempted to do it.
Mike, scientists cannot explain lightning in a thundercloud either. Does that mean it's magic, that Thor is real?
No. Now you're going apples and oranges. Let's get back to the origin of life. It's critical to our Darwin.
But life is way more complicated than a thundercloud.
That means all Darwinism, all evolutionists have to accept part of their model by faith. Are you?
They don't.
No,
Why
they
not?
don't. Because
Mr. Riddle,
we don't care how life originated.
If someone is a Christian,
someone
is a Christian,
question. I'm asking you the question.
If someone is,
stop trying to defer this thing here.
If someone is a Christian,
either you can produce the evidence or you have to believe by faith. That's the end of the discussion right there.
There is much evidence that indicates the origin of.
No, so I can quote you. I'm going to get you on this one. I'm going to put papers out that you too are making a claim that life originated by naturalistic processes. Is that true?
Then you would be bearing false witness.
We are not saying we believe 100% that that's the case.
We will not stand idly by while we bear false
witness. You believe by 50% it happened. 40%.
I don't know.
I don't know. I suspect life originated, just as I suspect there was a Homer.
Let's get intellectually honest now. You believe by faith?
No.
Then why do you believe?
If it can be established, would you mind asking people what they actually think rather than declaring what it is we think? If it can be physically established in the same way that we can tell that the thermodynamics shows that perpetual motion is impossible, then I will have to philosophically deal with the fascinating issue about how life originated. But none of that makes the reptile-mammal transition go away. Not one of it makes any of the Mesozoic birds go away. Not one of it makes the paleogenomics data goes away. Not one of it. And not one of it makes the God of Abraham any more likely to be the explanation for any of that.
Sure does, because you have no known scientific process for how life could originate other than there had to be a creator.
And you're stuck on origins or bust. And he's always going to be stuck on origins or bust.
Do you know what the difference between abiogenesis and evolution is?
Abiogenesis deals with the chemical process.
So what is evolution?
Biological, but all Darwin evolution is resting on the fact that that happened, or it's a faith.
Mr. Riddle, have you read Origin of Species?
I've read parts of it.
Do you know how much of that gigantic, you know how much of that volume is dedicated to the origin of life?
None of it really.
Part of one sentence.
Yeah.
Because it was irrelevant to his argument.
Right, because he did not care.
Irrelevant to his argument.
Yes, it does.
Then,
Mr. Riddle, the whole point we're talking about abiogenesis is because you believe it is relevant to evolution. So if it's not relevant, which even Darwin knew it wasn't,
you ignore what you can't explain. And you're not intellectually honest to say you have to accept it by faith because you can't produce anything. It's a giant hole in your
once again, I have to tell you, I became an evolutionist full bore when I found out about the reptile-mammal transition. I would have to believe that God was a cheat, because God was deliberately designing fossil after fossil after fossil after fossil after fossil that exactly matched an evolutionary sequence that was absolutely unique, that got from that reptile jaw that you don't seem to know anything about to the mammal jaw that you don't seem to know anything about. That persuaded me. Now, if you want to persuade me that the reptile mammal transition doesn't exist, you're going to have to know some of the data. And so far, you don't know it. And I'll tell you why. Because nobody in the creationist field has ever bothered to discuss the subject. Even Dwayne Gish, who barely skirted past it. And I don't have to guess at this because I have surveyed all of them.
Oh, that's good. I'm happy for you there, what you believe. But you said God is a cheat, so you know more than God, is what you're telling me.
No, I would have to say that if God just cheated that, if God made Adam and Eve with an expired library card in their wallet and an entire house of Art Deco furniture as a cheat to make them think that they lived in a different time, that would be stupid. No, if there had been no reptile mammal transition, that would have been a serious gap in the evolutionary sequence. But we would have to argue that God not only made these animals to make Robert Broom happy in the 20th century, but also deliberately made sure that they sank in the flood in exactly the right spots, that by coincidence would exactly match the standard geological system that you insist isn't true.
What's wrong
That's
with
weird. I can't believe that. I don't think if any gods exist that they would be such cheats.
Okay, so if you were God, you'd do it a lot better, is what you're telling me.
Well, what RJ
No,
is
I
saying
would
is
say
that
don't make something. It's as like if God puts up a chart, goes out of their way to make a monument that says Allah is true and Muhammad is his prophet, that would be not a cheat if that was not true. That's exactly the same situation
Riddle,
with the reptile mammal transition.
What RJ is saying is that we are making these predictions based on common ancestry, based purely on the concept of common ancestry. And these predictions that we made are coming true. So why would God fulfill these predictions that we made based purely on common ancestry? Why would God do that?
First of all, you don't have any real transitions. I know what you're talking about.
You keep insisting that, and you show no knowledge of them. You have already admitted you don't know anything about the reptile mammal transition. Isn't that correct?
Well, I don't know near as much as you do, but I do know.
I don't think you know anything about it. What do you know about the reptile mammal transition? Tell us.
Go back to something you said about cheat. What's wrong with cheating in your worldview?
Oh no, we're not getting into a philosophical
because
discussion.
That is information distortion.
RJ,
that is a prime postulate. Are you going off on morality
RJ,
now?
This
is don't use the word then. Don't use the word and accuse my God of cheating.
This is not a relevant conversation.
I accuse the young Earth creationist of implicitly implying he cheated. I don't think God cheated. I don't think God made the reptile mammal transition. They are naturally evolved. They still exist. So I don't have to blame God for this.
I think you're looking at too many artist drawings and too many assumptions that we have a track record.
We can look at the fossils.
I'm looking at the physical paleontology and the technical paper that you have never. Swear again. How many papers on the reptile mammal transition by actual scientists have you ever read? Name them. Any. Can you say a number?
Okay, I'll just tell you 0. Now, you tell me how life originated and how selection.
Irrelevant. Nope. Irrelevant.
So I'll say, I will continue to say, we do not know how life originated. We do not claim it had to have originated naturally, but the reptile mammal transition data exists, and objectively, you know nothing whatsoever about it and can offer no explanation for that data other than just bluff.
Okay, I got your quote down there. We don't know anything how life originated. Okay, I got that one down. Made that statement.
No, let me say this. We do not know that life originated naturally as a certainty. We know lots of clues. We know that the earliest life was bacterial. There was no complex life to begin with. We can observe that the amino acids that form most of the proteins are the easiest to synthesize in prebiotic experiments and are the ones that are encoded for by a duplex codon system, which is very probably going to be the precursor system. We're all looking here hundreds of millions of years possibly before the Luca system. Do I think all the solves have been done? No. And that's why I keep on saying, and Jackson and everybody else that I've ever seen in this field will tell you, no, we have not solved the origin of life. But I will tell you again, and if you quote me on the origin of life, you'd better quote this too, that the reptile mammal transition exists according to James Downard, and that he has determined that Mike Riddle has studied nothing whatsoever on it. Will you put that in as well?
Sure, I have no problem with that. Give me that in. The reptile to what? Let me get this down. Print it right. The reptile to.
Let me speak slowly and write it down. Yes. The reptile mammal transition evidence, macroevolution evidence exists. Evolution uniquely explains it. No anti-evolutionist has ever accounted for it. And Mike Riddle has acknowledged in this video chat that he has never studied any of the science works on it.
Okay, I'll get that part.
And you can tell us if you have actually studied any of the science works on it, in which case it will be amended appropriately.
I can also put in there that neither one of you could explain how life originated.
Nope.
Is it okay?
Yeah, I can't explain if anything existed before the Big Bang either. And by the way, you doubt the Big Bang too, don't you?
Well,
sure do.
hey guys,
Horrible science.
guys,
Yeah.
it's been
Where does
like
Take that
It's
up
been
with
like-
you, Ross.
it's been like an hour and a half now, and so it's like almost 10:20 where I am. So we're gonna nix the broadcast.
I want to say thank you both,
Yeah.
gentlemen.
May I at least thank
yes, sir.
Mike for coming into this lion's
I
den?
thought it was a good discussion. Overall, it was a good
I think
discussion.
so too. We had as much fun now as we had back in 2010, I think.
And nobody yelled or screamed. So thank you very much.
Well, it's hard to
I
do
got
that.
A little
I've got-
bit loud.
Get into any name.
Yeah, nobody was screaming.
We did.
Well,
we did well. We did
Mr. Riddle, if you could stick around a little bit after I end the broadcast, I'd be.
Sure.
Okay. And I want to say thank you to everyone who was in the chat. Thank you to everyone who was asking us questions and things like that. Thank you, everybody. Have a nice night. Bye.